Hey there. You ever get this feeling like history class kind of skipped a few chapters? Today, we're diving deep, like really deep, into one of those missing pages, the Ghana Empire.
And not the Ghana we know today, right?
Right. We're talking about an ancient powerhouse centuries before Europe even showed up on the scene.
It's a story that really flips the script on how we think about empires. And judging by this stack of articles and historical texts you've sent me, we've got a lot to unpack.
We've got a lot. Okay, so before we go full-on time traveler, let's get everyone on the same page. Ghana Empire in a nutshell. Where was this place and when did it rule?
Picture this. It's roughly the 3rd to the 13th century, and nestled in what we now call Mauritania and Mali, the Ghana Empire is the place to be. And the reason? Gold, and I mean lots of it.
So we're talking serious bling. Right from the get-go, our sources jumped into this whole debate about how Ghana even got started. It's like page 1 of the history book is just gone.
Yeah.
What are the theories about who actually founded this gold-drenched empire?
Okay, so that's part of what makes the Ghana Empire so fascinating, right? You've got these different threads of information, and they're all kind of tugging you in different directions. Now, the Soninke people, they've lived in this region for centuries, and they've got these vibrant oral traditions passed down through generations about this legendary figure named Dinga.
Diga. Okay, now that's a name you don't hear every day.
I know, right? He's almost this mythical figure, supposedly journeyed from the east, maybe even as far as Aswan in Egypt. And these traditions, they link him to the Soninke, which hints that the empire, it sprang up from within. It wasn't imposed from outside.
So we've got these like passed down stories, but then we've also got accounts from those early Arabic texts. I imagine those paint a different picture.
They do. Some of them suggest that the founders, maybe they were the Wangara, another Soninke group known for being really savvy traders. Others say it was the Berber people. There's even this old theory about a Judeo-Syrian invasion, but honestly, historians have pretty much debunked that one.
Wow. Talk about a historical head scratcher.
Yeah.
So we've got all these different versions of how Ghana began. How do we even begin to make sense of it all?
That's where archaeology comes in, adds its own piece to the puzzle. See, digs, particularly at a site called Dar Tishit, they suggest that the empire had local roots. This place, it just screams ancient, complex culture, and there are clear connections to those early Soninke.
So we're seeing more support for those homegrown indigenous origin stories.
Absolutely. And that's a big deal because it's not just about, who got there first. It's about how we frame this whole narrative of the Ghana Empire. These origin stories, they shape our understanding of power, influence, whose voices get heard throughout history.
You're right. It really makes you realize how much of history is about interpretation, not just facts.
And speaking of which, something that really struck me going through these sources is how the Ghana Empire, they didn't rise to the top through brute force. They were strategic. How did they become so powerful without conquering everyone?
It's a fascinating case of brains over brawn. Their power really stemmed from their mastery of something absolutely essential in a world, centuries before cars or trains. Trade. We're talking about control over those key trade routes that crisscross the Sahara Desert. Just imagine the logistics of that. Let's talk about logistical nightmare. And the Sahara Desert. Not exactly a walk in the park. Weren't camels a total game changer for trade in this part of the world?
Oh, absolutely. Camels, they were revolutionary. They made it possible to move these goods across those vast, incredibly harsh distances. But it was Ghana's control over one specific good that really set them apart: gold.
Right. The Ghana Empire, it was like right smack in the middle of the gold trade, like being built on top of a gold mine, right?
Exactly. They were at the crossroads of it all. They may not have controlled every single mine, but they controlled the flow of gold, and they knew how to use that. Remember that gold dinar tax I mentioned earlier? They slapped that on anyone moving gold through their territory. Think of it like ancient tariffs.
Smart move. Control the resource, control the wealth, control everything. It's a classic power move. And clearly, it worked. Our sources describe the Ghana Empire as incredibly wealthy. But what about their government? How'd they keep everything running smoothly with all that gold flowing in?
Well, at the heart of it all was the king. We're talking ultimate power, ultimate authority. And we have this incredible account from al-Bakri, a scholar who actually visited the empire back in the 11th century. He describes the king holding court in this pavilion decked out in gold, with guards and nobles showcasing all the empire's wealth.
Okay, now that's an image. That's going to stick with me. So you've got this larger-than-life king, but what about the rest of the empire? How did they manage such a huge territory?
They were masters of delegation in a way. The empire had this central region where the king, He held most of his sway. But surrounding it were all these semi-independent vassal states. Think of them as mini kingdoms within the empire, each with its own local ruler who paid tribute to the king.
So it's like a franchise model for empires. So
Exactly.
they had
Yeah.
the trade routes, the gold, the powerful king, the vassal states. It sounds like they had everything for a long and prosperous reign.
They did. But even the mightiest empires, they faced their twilight.
They do.
It's history for you, right? Always twists and turns. And for the Ghana Empire, well, it wasn't this like one big dramatic fall, more like this mix of internal struggles, those power grabs, different factions vying for control, and then all these external pressures that just chipped away at their dominance.
Like that saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So what were some of those pressures that really pushed the Ghana Empire toward its decline?
Okay, well, imagine for a second a kingdom that's built right on the edge of a desert. Now imagine that desert, the Sahara, is slowly but surely expanding, swallowing up farmland, changing those crucial trade routes. That's what the Ghana Empire was up against.
So their breadbasket starts shrinking. And those trade routes, the ones that brought in all that gold, those start drying up. Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
It certainly didn't help. And as if that wasn't enough, ambitious neighbors, the Soso Empire in particular, they were this rising force in the region, and they saw an opportunity, they took it. They eventually conquered Ghana in the 13th century.
So the Sosos were like the new kid on the block, flexing their muscles, shaking things up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even before the Soso, delivered that final blow, the Ghana Empire, it was feeling the heat. Remember those shifting trade routes we talked about? They allowed all these new trading centers to flourish. Ghana, they bypassed it entirely, which of course weakened their economic power. It's a classic case of how geography can make or break an empire.
Location, 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 as they say. But before we get too caught up in Ghana's decline, let's rewind a bit. We keep mentioning the Soso conquest of Koumbi Saleh, this like almost mythical capital city. What can you tell us about this legendary city?
Koumbi Saleh. It wasn't just a city. This was the heart of the Ghana Empire. Al-Bakri, the scholar who gave us that peek into the king's court, well, he described Koumbi Saleh as this sprawling metropolis, this incredible melting pot of cultures, all drawn in by, you guessed it, gold and trade.
Okay, paint us a picture here. What would it have been like to actually walk through the streets of Koumbi Saleh back in its heyday?
Okay, imagine this. It's bustling, it's huge, so large, in fact, that it's practically two cities in one. Al-Bakri, he describes these two distinct sections, about 6 miles apart, but connected by this continuous sprawl of dwellings. Must have been something to see.
A city so big you could get lost for days. Were those two parts, though, were they very different for each other?
Oh, they were strikingly different, like two sides of the same coin almost. One part, according to al-Bakri, it was this hub for Muslim merchants and traders, people from all these far-off lands. He mentions 12 mosques, which suggests a really vibrant Islamic community. Imagine the conversations, the sense of spices from distant lands, the sound of prayers echoing from those mosques.
Oh, man. I'm getting serious travel back in time vibes. What about the other half of this megacity?
That's where you find the seat of power. This section, it was known as El Gaba, and it housed the royal palace, the king's inner circle. Definitely a place of grandeur with these impressive domed buildings, probably residences for nobles or government officials. Al-Bakri even describes a sacred grove of trees tended by priests, so we're seeing that blend of traditional beliefs with the empire's growing Islamic influences.
So you've got international commerce, deep-rooted traditions, all within the walls of this one sprawling city. But if Koumbi Saleh was so magnificent, how come it's basically gone? What evidence do we even have that it existed at all?
See, and that's one of the most fascinating things about Koumbi Saleh. It's a puzzle, archaeologically speaking. Based on the excavations we've done, we think the city, it was abandoned sometime in the 15th century, probably because of those shifting trade patterns we talked about, maybe the decline of the Ghana Empire in general.
So what happened? Did it just crumble back into the desert?
In a way, yeah. The sands of time, right? They have a way of covering things up. But here's the exciting part. In the early 20th century, French archaeologists, they started excavating a site in present-day Mauritania, and many believe that this is it. This is Koumbi Saleh.
They actually found it. So what did they find?
Well, they uncovered the foundations of houses, remnants of mosques, even a mosque that might be the mosque that al-Bakri described, the one reserved for Friday prayers. Can you imagine? Standing in a place where history literally comes to life like that.
Gives me chills. But hold on, if they found mosques, houses, does that mean they find the gold too?
Unfortunately, no lost treasures. Yet. But honestly, The real treasure is the knowledge. It's those tangible links to the past. It's a way to connect with those people who walked those streets centuries ago.
Makes you wonder what else is out there, right? Buried beneath the sands,
Hmm.
just waiting to be found. But even with these finds, I have to ask, are we absolutely sure this is the Koumbi Saleh? Or could there be another lost city, maybe even more incredible than the one we've already found?
That's the beauty of studying history, especially ancient history. There's always more to learn, always something else to uncover. And you've hit on a fascinating point. While this city, this site, and some of the details, they match al-Bakri's descriptions, there's still debate. Scholars still go back and forth about whether this is the real Koumbi Saleh.
Oh, really? What's the debate about?
Well, there's this other scholar, Ali Drizi, who wrote about the Ghana Empire in the 12th century, and he mentions a new royal palace, one that was located near a river, which doesn't really line up with what they've excavated at the Koumbi Saleh site.
So there's a chance there's another city, a rival to Koumbi Saleh, just waiting to be found.
Now, wouldn't that be something? It just goes to show there's so much we still don't know about the Ghana Empire. But even as we make these new discoveries, it's important to remember that history, it's not just about grand palaces and lost cities, right? It's about people.
That's a good point. We've talked about kings, trade, conquest,
Mm.
but what about everyday life? What was it like to be a farmer, a trader, a craftsman in this, thriving West African kingdom?
It's a question we don't ask enough. When we get caught up in these big narratives of empires, well, we know the Ghana Empire. It was incredibly diverse. People of all different backgrounds, ethnicities, drawn together by opportunity. And like most societies, they had this social hierarchy.
So kings, nobles at the top, merchants, artisans somewhere in the middle,
Mm.
and then, farmers, laborers at the bottom.
You got it. But even within that structure, there was room for people to specialize, to move up in the world. A skilled artisan, for instance, they could gain some serious wealth, some real status in their community. We know that ironworking, for example, was huge in the Ghana Empire. Just imagine the skill it took to transform raw ore into tools, weapons, using the technology they had back then.
It's mind-blowing. And it makes you realize that ingenuity, that cleverness,
Hmm.
it's not new, right?
Absolutely. But what about their beliefs? We talked about Islam, right? But before that, what were their spiritual lives like?
That's a good question. What did they believe before Islam arrived?
It's one of those fascinating parts of their story, because before Islam became so prominent, the people of the Ghana Empire, they probably practiced various forms of traditional African religions. Big emphasis on ancestral spirits, the power of nature. We actually get glimpses of this in al-Bakri's description of El Gaba, that royal city, remember, with the sacred grove and the priests. That suggests this deep respect for the spiritual world.
It's interesting how religion can be both unifying and,
Yeah.
well, divisive. We see it all the time in history, don't we?
We do. And the Ghana Empire is no exception. When Islam showed up, brought by those traders and scholars, it didn't just erase everything that came before it. Instead, you get this really interesting blending of traditions, a kind of religious fusion, you could say.
So it wasn't a case of out with the old, in with the new,
Yeah.
more like blending ideas, practices.
Exactly. Scholars call it syncretism, and it's this fascinating phenomenon. People might still honor their ancestors, right? But they're also adopting Islamic practices like prayer and fasting. We see this in other cultures, too, throughout history. New beliefs, they get layered onto those existing traditions.
Like that saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to talk about, syncretism in the abstract. Can you give us some examples of how this played out in the Ghana Empire?
Absolutely. Imagine a craftsman. He's carving this wooden mask, a tradition that's been passed down probably for generations. Now, this mask might have elements of traditional spirits and Islamic iconography. It's a reflection of that fusion of beliefs. Or think about festivals. You've got traditional harvest festivals, maybe, that start to incorporate Islamic prayers and rituals. You get this unique blend of cultural and religious expression.
Oh, those are great examples. It really brings that whole idea to life. So we've got this picture of a religiously diverse society. What about daily life, though? What would it have been like to walk through a marketplace in the Ghana Empire? The sights, the sounds.
Sensory overload, the air, it's thick with spices, cinnamon, cloves, maybe even a hint of frankincense. You hear the clang of blacksmiths, hammering out tools and weapons, the rhythmic beat of drums accompanying a storyteller. And everywhere you look, there's color, tons of it. Brightly dyed textiles from North Africa, these woven baskets overflowing with produce.
Man, I feel like I'm right there with you. It sounds vibrant, full of energy. But I'd imagine that life back then, It wasn't always a party. What were some of the downsides?
You're right. Life, even in a prosperous empire, it had its hardships. If you were a farmer, you were always at the mercy of the weather. A bad drought, that could mean famine. And then, of course, there were diseases, which were much more prevalent and a lot more deadly back then. No modern medicine. Even something like a simple infection could be really dangerous.
It's a good reminder that even when we romanticize the past, life back then, it was harsh, unpredictable.
Definitely puts things into perspective. But even with all that, people, they found a way. They formed communities, they relied on each other, and they found ways to not only survive, but to thrive.
It's incredible, isn't it, that human resilience? And it speaks to the legacy of the Ghana Empire.
Mhm.
Incredible is right. I mean, a story might be over, but like you said, their legacy, it just echoes. So let's talk about that impact. How did the Ghana Empire, how did it leave its mark on the world?
Well, for one, their name lives on, and not just in, history books. When modern-day Ghana, hundreds of miles to the southeast, when they were choosing a name upon independence back in 1957, it was a deliberate choice, a nod to this ancient power. They saw in the Ghana Empire this legacy of African ingenuity, trade dominance, sophisticated governance, all of it.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
To learn about a powerful empire from the past is one thing, but to actually claim that legacy as your own, that's something else.
It really is. And it goes beyond just a name, of course. The Ghana Empire, it was like this cultural crossroads. There are trade networks, right? Those arteries across the desert, they weren't just moving goods, they were spreading ideas, technology, even artistic styles, all across West Africa. Think of it like the original Silk Road, but with a lot more gold and a few more
So
camels.
you're saying the echoes of this one empire, we could still see them today in the art, the culture of West Africa.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the political influence. They set the bar for successful governance in the region. Later empires, like Mali, which we talked about, they didn't just appear out of nowhere. They learned from those who came before, adopted similar systems of rule, like those semi-independent vassal states, and they understood that to have power, you had to control those trade routes.
Talk about a tough act to follow.
Hmm.
But it shows you how connected history is. We think of these empires, they rise, they fall, all in isolation, but it's never that simple.
Never that simple. The Ghana Empire, it's all part of this bigger story, this tapestry of West African history. And it reminds us that there are these hidden giants out there, civilizations that, yeah, we might not have learned about in school, but they played huge roles in shaping our world.
And the best part, the story of the Ghana Empire, it's not over. New discoveries are happening all the time.
All the time. We think we know it all, and then bam, new archaeological dig, new translation of some ancient text. It's like the story just keeps unfolding.
Like those Russian nesting dolls.
Mhm.
Layers upon layers of history to unpack. Makes you wonder what people will be saying about our civilization, centuries from now.
Right. But for now, we've got these stories that have been passed down. We have the writings of those early scholars, and we have those incredible clues from archaeology. And when you put it all together, it paints this amazing picture of a powerful empire, a testament to African innovation, to resilience, and to the power of human connection, even across vast distances and cultures.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of the Ghana Empire. Gold, camels, bustling cities, a legacy that's still felt today. What more could you ask for?
And don't forget about that new royal palace, the one Al-Adrizi described, near the river.
Oh, right, the one that doesn't quite line up with Koumbi Saleh. What if he was right? What if there's another city out there, maybe even more magnificent than the Koumbi Saleh?
Wouldn't that be incredible?
It really makes you think. It seems the story of the Ghana Empire, much like archaeology itself, it never really ends, does it? Just waiting for that next layer to be revealed.